Well, hi everyone, and welcome to our panel today, From Hype to Action, How Generative AI Will Impact Brand Marketing. This webinar is hosted by Radicle Insights, a research and insights platform focusing on new markets and new technologies. My name is James Mao. I'm the moderator of this panel and director of research at Radicle. So at Radicle, we believe that the people best positioned to give you guidance in navigating the future are the people who have the real world expertise in building and deploying solutions and startups in the field. And generative AI is no different. So we're offering research and strategic advisory products to innovation, marketing, data science, and strategy teams at companies across the world, bringing in the perspectives of practitioners and experts to help our clients understand the market landscape, run use case validation sprints, and stand up proofs of concept quickly. So today I'm really excited to host this panel featuring two of our leading experts in the field, Kaas and Shikhar Singh. Christian has almost a decade's worth of engaging in early stage AI and deep learning. He co-founded and led product for the Generative AI for Ads group at Facebook. And he's now the CEO and founder of Seraph AI, a security company for enterprise LLMs. Shikhar has over a decade of experience in designing, building, and scaling enterprise solutions. Previously, he was head of solutions architecture at Moveworks, a generative AI company with over 300 million in venture capital. Today, he's the enterprise solutions lead at Copy.ai. So thanks everyone for attending this panel. Welcome to our panelists. Thanks for joining us. Our hope is that our panelists will be able to help our attendees cut through the noise by showing you the implications and applications of generative AI that could transform how you engage with your customers and create value. Our mission is to provide you with actionable takeaways that will allow you to make a positive impact on your work today. So let's get into it with some background. Christian, maybe I'll begin by asking you, for the benefit of our audience, what is generative AI and what distinguishes it from other types of machine learning or artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. It's a good question, and I think I'd answer it in two ways. The first way, from a technical perspective. So most of us have been hearing about AI in some way, shape, or form for a few years now. And for the most part, that's always been predictive AI. So models that you train on large amounts of data, and you're asking them to make a prediction. So typically in marketing and sales, take this customer data, tell me which segment this individual belongs to, or in the use case of some of the work that I did at Meta, here's all of this customer data, here's all of this ad data, and figure out what ad to show to what customer. And that's really been what AI has been for the last few years. Generative AI is a little bit different in that we're still training on vast amounts of data, but now the problem we're posing to the model is make me a thing that is similar to the input training data. So learn what a dog is, and then draw me a picture of a dog, for example. But I think the second and maybe the more interesting perspective when you sort of contrast why this is new is the way in which these models are being used. So predictive AI has been, for the most part, fairly narrowly applied, right? It's in a lot of the products that we use. It's probably in this Zoom thing somewhere, but most of us don't have a day-to-day use case for it. And that's really, I think, what's completely changed with generative AI, whether you're using Midjourney to make an image for, a mock-up for your new product, or using ChatGPT to write hate mail to Comcast. Apologies if Comcast is on the call, by the way. Generative AI is something that we can all find tremendous use for in everyday life. And I think that's really part of the magic and part of the mystique of generative AI. And I think something that we're going to try to disentangle a bit today.
Cool. Yeah, great. I think that's a great start. So it seems like, as you said, there has been older uses of AI, not necessarily generative, more predictive. And it feels like some of the technical innovation has been around for some time, but GenAI as a buzzword, as a technology, is really starting to get mainstream attention over the past 9 to 12 months. And when it comes to enterprise adoption of GenAI, there does seem to be a consensus that brand marketing might be the place to start. So Shikhar, I would ask, would you agree with that? And if so, why do you think GenAI is particularly relevant for marketing professionals?
It's a great question. And, I think you're 100% right about the mainstream attention that generative AI has gotten. And perhaps, to Christian's point, everyone just really loves sending hate mail to Comcast. But I think, capturing people's imagination is definitely an element of it. And really, I think a big part of why the market's actually evolved as quickly as it has is because of the advent of products like ChatGPT and the framing of it actually being an accessible technology that actually allows us to, have pretty massive breakthroughs due to the capacity to fundamentally create infinite things with a really simple interface, right? If I can describe my problem, or I can describe what I'm trying to do, or what I actually need, I can get, at least a starting point of an output, and I can iterate on that as a typical user without having to know anything about machine learning models, predictive AI, or even generative AI for that matter. And so, I want to contrast this really to my experience at Moveworks prior to joining Copy.ai. I remember, in 2019, we were actually trying to educate the market on the fact that a chatbot could actually understand what they wanted. Everyone thought our demos were smoke and mirrors because every chatbot they had used was, honestly kind of trash and would get confused easily. And you had to say exactly the right thing to get what you wanted. And you fast forward to today, and I think that, ChatGPT and really the advent of this technology being accessible has fundamentally changed the way that people think about its applications, about how they could even leverage it in their day-to-day. And when you think about from a brand marketer's perspective, or really any marketer's perspective, the capacity to be able to create infinite things, or aid them in a creative process, or help them actually take some of the very, I guess, diverse tasks that they're assigned, and have a path to be able to get it done, allows them to actually meet the demands of the organization in a much more effective way. And really, I think big picture, capitalize on the limited amount of the creative brain juice that we might have in a given day.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. So I think for the rest of the webinar, the two of you will be sharing about how generative AI can enhance creativity, how marketing functions or organizations or agencies should be thinking about adopting generative AI. And I think we want to close on a discussion about the potential to harness human creativity that generative AI presents. So let's start with enhancing creativity. But before we do that, one of the themes of today's webinar is cutting through the hype. I'd love for each of you to state one misconception or one over-exaggeration about generative AI that you hope that our audience can be educated on, and cut through the hype on that by the end of the hour. So Shikhar, what would that be for you?
So I'm going to probably pick the most controversial one here, and we've probably all seen this countless times, right? It's not AI that's going to take your job. It's someone using AI that's going to take your job. Let me be really clear on this. This technology is incredibly transformative and absolutely has the potential to actually enable companies to do more with less. And AI is in a position to automate lots of what we think of as jobs today. But ask yourself the question of why this actually is the best part, and why this statement, I think, fundamentally just misses the point entirely of what this technology is capable of and how we should be thinking about it. Most of the market today, I think, is focused on AI use cases that really drive operational effectiveness or operational efficiencies, because that is, frankly, the most obvious leverage point. You could use a platform like ChatGPT to quickly get something done a little bit faster. But the bigger opportunity, I think, and the bigger winners at the end of the day are going to be actually those that are really thinking about the 0 to 1 opportunities. What I mean by that is, what does your marketing strategy look like if you had infinite capacity on your team? What would your day-to-day look like if you could focus on strategy and making decisions, as opposed to doing a lot of the mundane things that are on your plate today? How could this technology even be exploited to create new opportunities and generate revenue rather than simply cutting costs? I think these are the types of questions we should be asking ourselves. And actually, I'm extremely bullish on the positive impact that this can have on the business as a whole. But even the framing of a statement like, it's someone with AI that's going to take your job is just, I think, complete bullshit. And we should all push back on it and think, what does work look like in a world where a lot of the things that we don't need to do or didn't have to do ourselves look like? And is that a world that we want to live in?
Christian, what would your misconception or over-exaggeration that you want to cut through the hype on be?
Mine's a little bit different. I think the one that gets to me the most is there's a lot of hype in some marketing circles, particularly the kind of quantitative marketing ones, where people seem to believe that generative AI is going to help us generate performance advertising. Sort of like if you were able to put that, I think it's the old John Wanamaker quote that's, half of my marketing budget or half of my ad budget is wasted. I just don't know which half. Somehow generative AI is going to be a solution to that, because we're just going to make things that are performant right off the bat. And you see a bunch of startups that have appeared with that kind of pitch in the last probably year or so. And I don't believe that at all. I think it's actually something that we had big arguments about at Facebook. And my point of view is that, look, there are ways that you can use generative AI to get better performance out of your marketing spend. There's no question about that. But this idea that you're going to click a button and somehow get a performant ad out of that, I think that's just misguided, to be polite. It's really akin, in my view, to explaining what makes great art. And just because you can write it down and you can make a sentence out of it doesn't mean it's true. So that's the one that makes me arch an eyebrow.
Great. Well, I like that we're starting hot. Let's move into some, I guess, specifics and examples. I know everyone here is really excited to hear about the two of you, or hear from the two of you because of the kind of real world tactical experience you have with using generative AI. So now that we set the table with some definitions, maybe let's talk specifically about how generative AI can be a tool in the toolkit for the marketing professionals. So Christian, I'll start with you. If there was just one generative AI use case that an enterprise should get really good at over the next 6 months, what would you say it should be and why?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to be a little bit naughty because I'm going to answer a slightly different one. I think it's hard to generalize across all of marketing and sales because it really depends on who you're talking to. It depends on what channels your brand is using. It depends on who you are, brand strategist, media buyer, et cetera. So to sort of say, look, there's one use case that we need to get good at, I think that's a tall order. Instead, I'll invite us to think about things slightly differently. So one of the things that we ran into when we were developing Meta's strategy for generative AI was the fact that we had a choice: do we focus on large brand agencies or smaller SME type companies? And through the dozens of interviews that we did, one of the things we learned was that the bigger the brand, or the more agency the brand, the less the challenge is actually about content creation and about creativity, and the more it's actually about enforcing guidelines, getting approvals for different things that you want to try. So it's essentially a workflow problem for those people. And that's fine, right? That's not exceptional for this. There's a lot of industries where that's the case. But the challenge here is that if the promise of generative AI is, like Shikhar said, to make creativity easier, to make it easier for you to try new things, to produce more content, well, then you have this giant bottleneck at the end of that process because you haven't resolved this question of workflow and approvals. So somewhere it's a little bit of a boring thing to say, but what I would invite people to do for the next 6 months is really to spearhead cultural change in your organizations and to think about, how do we experiment with this stuff safely? How do we sandbox some of this work so that we can discover how to make generative AI work for us without blowing up the brand? And I think that's really the kind of boring but really, really important problem that doesn't get talked about enough.
Great. Shikhar, what about you? What would you pick for the next 6 months for an enterprise to focus on?
So that actually, Christian stole my line here because I don't think I can answer the question of like what exact use case should someone decide to focus on. But I do think actually, just to nod to that, I think I've seen this a ton in the market where companies that are later stage in this journey actually have the exact problem that Christian had called out. When you have the ability to create infinite content, then your review pipeline actually becomes your bottleneck. Good news here, and shameless plug that this could actually also be an interesting use case for generative AI. There are a lot of ways that you can use this to actually reinforce the rules that you're enforcing today. So maybe cutting down on some of those review bottlenecks is one of the things that you want to start with. But taking a step back, Copy.ai has been working and building on LLM since 2020. I don't know if we coined the term AI native, but we definitely live and breathe it every day. We actually just launched a platform called Workflows, which is designed for everyday people to become automation engineers simply by being able to describe what they want. I've seen this firsthand. Maybe 8 months ago, I was the only person at my company, or me and a few other people were the only people that were actually making workflows. As soon as we released the builder capability, what our marketing team did was automate landing page creation, just using a few different keywords, automatically summarize all of the sales calls that were actually happening so that they could extract data points, summaries, all the things to understand if they wanted to review it later, or honestly, just understand what keywords or things that we're seeing in the front lines. Improve SEO by creating meta tags and descriptions, and write even better alt text for images. improve our outbound motion by writing personalized outbound sequences for every single person that we reach out to, using the data enrichment pipeline that we already had in place. Automate pre and post sales production tasks for webinars. Like, imagine not having to do any of the work to launch a webinar like this, which I'm sure James has spent quite a bit of time on. And then actually after it's done, being able to get a YouTube ready summary with topic summaries as well as timestamps. I mean, these kinds of things are the kinds of tasks that just take so much time for a typical organization. And when you think about how long this list is, you start realizing really what the common theme is, right? That there's really internal tools that can be a great starting point, and it doesn't all have to be a single turn interaction like ChatGPT. So many people, I think, give up because they can't get what they want out of a single prompt. Well, actually, something prompt chaining can be a really effective way at taking some of these more complex problems and breaking it down the same way that you and I do. And I think by focusing on use cases that are important to you, that your team is responsible for, that arguably still have a human in the loop because you're going to be reviewing the outputs because it was part of your job anyways, you can actually leverage this to also get 4 or 5 steps ahead and start that automation journey. I will say there are other things to consider, like focusing on data sensitivity as an example. Obviously you want to think about use cases where you're not using PII. That's going to piss off your security organization, but I think the use cases are obvious when you actually start thinking about the stuff that's on your plate.
Cool. Yeah, thank you both for sharing. I think to build off a bit what you said, Shikhar, like people struggling with prompts, not getting quite what they want. Maybe it's helpful here to peel back the curtain a little bit without getting overly technical. But what exactly is happening when we use generative AI, whether it's prompting ChatGPT or using it to generate images? How does it ensure that it's unique and creative?
So at its core, these models have been trained on a vast amount of data, and they create uniqueness by actually identifying patterns and structures in that data, and then using that to create new things. And so we can help them be original by being better prompters, by providing more guidance, as opposed to having it, just using something lazy like write me 5 tweets about generative AI, versus, read this entire blog post, summarize the key points, and then use the brand voice guidelines that are provided to then write me, 5 tweets about generative AI that are used to promote this particular post, right? Is much more likely to, generate something unique and probably much more aligned with the outputs that you're actually looking for. And so, one other aspect that I think is important is, potentially using things like plagiarism checkers. I know that, schools have gotten really good at doing this off the cuff, but you can actually, orchestrate this, and you don't need AI to be a plagiarism checker. You can actually, find an API and use that automatically to find, some of the delta that, you would actually want to go for, and then potentially regenerate something if it, was over a certain threshold. And so, there is obviously risk that generative AI models, especially with lazy prompting, can do things like hallucinate, can do things like, give you incorrect information or, plagiarized information or, verbatim text that they've found in their training data. That said, I think that, there's a lot of guardrails that we can put in place, can make it much less likely and give you a lot of the things that you need out. And it also means that, especially if you're using it for your own research or creative process, like there's less of a risk there, right? So starting with internal use cases can help you build those skills while actually also, generating that new value.
Christian, anything to build on there, or maybe from the flip side, talking a bit about what are the limitations when it comes to infinite content?
I'll do both. So my take on uniqueness is well, it's a tough question. I think the most honest answer I can give you is that the technology itself, and this is a sort of theme in generative AI, the technology itself gives you very few guarantees about uniqueness or originality. That's kind of on you, right? The technology, the way it works under the hood, again, without being too technical, is, it tends to lead to results that will be unique, right? And you tend to not generate things that are in the training data. Those tend to be exceptions, right? But it is on you to sort of verify that that's the case. And I think that's what Shikhar was pointing to is, you can always, it's up to you to check whether or not this thing is plagiarized. You never know exactly what's happening. And there are ways that, generative AI can help you fix that if that's a case that you run into. But ultimately, it's always on the user, right? This is good engineering. It's not magic. In terms of limitations, I it's kind of one of the soapboxes that I stand on. I think creativity is a word that is overly used when we talk about generative AI. There is certainly some degree of perceived creativity in these models, and that they can show you things that you yourself have not thought of. But there's also clear limits to like how creative these things can get. And I'll give you two examples. If you're kind of like me, a sort of air and space nerd, you might have been to the Museum of Flight in Seattle. And if you look there, they have one of the sort of F-1 moon rockets. And if you look inside the rocket, you'll notice that the inside of the what's called the exhaust cone, it's not smooth, but it's got all these little tubes. And the reason for that is that early in the days of spaceflight, exhaust gases were so hot that they would melt the cone. And it wasn't until someone, I think it was Wernher von Braun, came up with the idea of actually using the fuel itself as a coolant that they were able to prevent these things from melting. And that's this, it's this kind of brilliant solution that is, it's obvious, but only in retrospect. And GPT models, all this kind of generative AI that we're talking about today, that they will never come up with that kind of solution, because the way the models are built is they're trained on what came before. And by definition, the connection to those kinds of solutions to what you did before is very, very loose. And it's this kind of 1% creativity, these exceptional ideas that these models will almost never help you get. They're just incapable of it. And so again, that's sort of on you. The other example, the moon rocket has clear parallels in marketing, right? Because who would have thought that one of the best competitors that we'd come up with for Coca-Cola would be a product that most people say tastes significantly worse, comes in a tiny can, and costs 4 times as much, but Red Bull does remarkably well. And again, a GPT model would never come up with that as a sort of marketing concept or a product strategy because it just makes no sense. It only makes sense after the fact, in retrospect. So again, there's so many more things in life that are good ideas that you can post-rationalize than ideas that you can pre-rationalize. And a lot of great human ideas are kind of post-rationalized ideas. And that kind of stuff, the models are not going to help you with. So it does help you kind of with a form of creativity, but I think it's really important to remember that, our brains are a kind of different kind of animal entirely. And some of the best ideas are things that today AI is going to struggle to help you with.
Great, and I just wanted to remind the audience that we will have a Q&A session towards the end, so feel free to submit questions either through the Q&A button down there on your webinar interface or to me directly.
Where I hope Comcast is not actually on the call,
right? No comment. So switching gears now to adopting GenAI in marketing. Shikhar, what can brand marketing teams or agencies do today to adopt GenAI in their marketing processes?
So I think, honestly, getting started is some of the most obvious feedback that I'd give, because, one of the things that I think teams struggle with most is actually figuring out, where to actually start and how to actually start to, do anything. And I think this goes back to like the use case discussion, right? Like, what is going to unblock you on a day-to-day basis? Wouldn't it be great if, like, complete the sentence, right? And chances are you're probably underestimating your own capabilities and actually being able to do something pretty important and pretty relevant that would immediately unblock and create value for you in the short run. And I think that there are other things to consider as well. Most professionals that I work with can't go 5 minutes without generative AI being part of their discussion. So finding the other folks that are excited about this technology that wants to be able to do this, hopefully someone on your team or someone that is a manager or a senior leader that's interested in this technology can be great. Sponsors that can help you, actually leverage this from a work context. But even if you can't do it from a work context, think about it from a outside of work context, or really any of the things that, you can actually start to drive forward. I think once, I'll say at Copy.ai, I've never had to put together a single business case for any customer because I think the ROI is literally that obvious. No one even asks about a business case. So I think the writing will be on the wall when you're able to prove something out. And even if you have to use dummy data to do it, you can instantly improve your day-to-day.
Christian, anything to add in terms of adopting GenAI?
No, I think that's pretty spot on, actually. It's consistent with what I see in companies. I think, my sort of post-meta life has been much less about marketing and sales and much more about, banking and like intelligence agencies. So I think the experience might be a little bit different. The only thing I would add from my perspective is that it depends who drives these innovations in companies, right? When it's the business and the business says, hey, I know how I want to use this technology to solve my problem, it is a no-brainer. Occasionally, and it sort of depends which company you're in, sometimes the generative AI revolution is being led by an innovation team, and sometimes the business is very old school and doesn't necessarily get the message. That I get the sense that's probably an exception to the rule, and I think what Shikhar said is actually spot on. I would have said very much the same.
Cool. So Shikhar, one stumbling block that marketing teams might face is the perception of the technical acumen required to successfully integrate Gen AI into their work. So in short, the concern might be that brand marketing teams can't really move forward with Gen AI tools without moving in cross-functional lockstep with, say, their IT or data science team. How valid is that perception? Do you think there's ways that marketing teams can get their arms around Gen AI, get their feet wet in this space in a lightweight manner?
I think this is actually the most ironic part of the generative AI boom, that this perception exists. And, anecdotally, it really depends on how versed you are in the space. There have been very, very, very brilliant machine learning engineers that I've worked with in the past that, don't know a ton about, like even simple things like context windows and some of the other details behind generative AI, just because, they're an expert, and ML is a very, very large topic, AI as well. And, generally speaking, there's just a lot of nuance to it. And so I think, when you take a step back, interest is really what's driving people's passion, and that passion is really what's driving their desire to dig in further and explore, what those limitations are. The models themselves are really designed to be very accessible, right? Text input, text output. This is perhaps the greatest equalizer of our time. And, to Christian's point from a moment ago, you can be relatively low tech and actually be in a very good position to drive a lot of impact with generative AI. And that really doesn't require much more than, you having the appetite to get started. Now, I know that there are certainly reasons to work closely with your security and IT teams for compliance reasons. Our mission at Copy.ai is to democratize that access and make sure that it's easy for someone to actually know that doesn't know how to code and doesn't know what a context window is, to actually be able to design their own, AI workflows. And I think that, when you think about that from the right use case perspective, and you're, forging the appropriate connections within the organization, the fact that you're not technical might prevent you from getting something into production or integrated with a tier 1 system, but it certainly shouldn't prevent you from actually, automating or otherwise accelerating your own workflow.
Christian, anything to add here? What are the trade-offs people should think about when maybe thinking about themselves as an individual or their team when it comes to am I technical enough to get this ball rolling in my organization?
I mean, I think most things in life, forget generative AI, right? Most things worth doing in life are really hard to do with a single person skill set. And so part of the art of doing anything impactful in life is figuring out the much harder skill set of how you get 3 people around the table to do something together, right? That's hard. And that's really the case here. So sometimes, you're going to have the right skill set to do what it is you want to do. Sometimes you're going to have to bring other people on board. I agree with Shikhar. I actually don't think that being a deep ML engineer is required for most of the impactful things you would want to do. But, the same is true of many things in life. I had another thought and it escaped me. So I think, no, I don't think in most cases that valuable use cases require you to be a great AI expert. I think what we're seeing is a lot of people, for the first time, AI is potentially accessible to them, whereas before it was completely inaccessible to them. And so what you have is this kind of residual anxiety of I don't know how to get started. But my advice to people is, if you're curious about this stuff, download Midjourney, play with it, demystify it for yourself, and you'll find out that actually it's very possible to do very impressive things with really very little technical skills.
Shikhar, I know
one other thing.
Go ahead.
Sorry, one other thing I wanted to add to that is, I think that I see this misconception a lot with people. They assume that technical means that they know how to, do deep technical things with, code or data or, something that is more traditionally thought of as technical. I look at it a little bit differently. I've met technical, SEO people. I've met technical brand marketers. I've met technical people that just have a brain for being able to break a complex problem down into steps. And that is actually one of the most dangerous skill sets to have in 2023, because to Christian's point, right, this is actually something that allows you to, have an expert that you can consult. Maybe not, the exact expert that you'd want to bring on as a full-time, machine learning engineer, but certainly get, a lot more of a foundation than you would typically get if you tried to go like solve a problem yourself. And so keep that in mind, and don't forget that like you can be a technical person, just a very, very different sense of the term.
Actually, you know what? That's a great point. And James and I were talking about this earlier. It's people always tend to assume that sort of engineers have the answers to everything. And having managed quite a lot of them, I think that the piece that's actually hard is marrying the tools that do things for you with the deep understanding of the problem. And the thing that's really easy when we work in industries and we sort of know our job really, really well is we forget actually how valuable that is and how like unobvious some of the things that are obvious to us are. So I didn't, when I started at Facebook, I didn't know anything about advertising or marketing. So it was like the dark arts to me. And it's really, really hard to understand what does marketing look like and what are the different roles and what is a media buyer and all that. And the more you understand that, the more you're able to understand, gee, there's this step here where most of the pain is that I could solve with generative AI. And it's not all the rest. Some of the stuff, frankly, it works quite well the way we do it now. It's not broken, don't touch it. But to Shikhar's point, it's not just throwing tech at something and saying it's magically going to get better. The valuable skill set sometimes is really just understanding the complexities of what it is we do, where the pain points are, and what a solution needs to look like. That's incredibly valuable. And it's, I don't know, it's probably a misattributed quote to Albert Einstein, but, someone said you spend 99% of the time thinking about the problem, right? And that's one of these things. Once you know what the problem is, the solution, I mean, there's plenty of tools off the shelf, right?
Yeah, I think this has kind of been an undercurrent of our conversation so far, but maybe just to bring it to the fore, thinking about the problems and the pain points, what's like the nature of the problem that suits it well for generative AI to be the solution? Like, are there commonalities in the types of pain points that you found generative AI to be able to solve better than others?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to echo a little bit of something I think Shikhar said earlier, is in marketing and sales, where I've seen this be really, really useful is use cases that marry just repetitive, boring work, like producing 47 different varieties of essentially what is the same ad, because, Facebook wants you to do it a little bit differently than, Google does from Snapchat. I mean, it's the same shoe, but for some reason I need to produce tens of versions of that. That great use case because it's low risk and it's high value, and it tends to be like high pain point for individuals. With the second aspect, which is inspirational deficit, I think Shikhar also mentioned that one. There's only so many ways that you and I can think of how to sell someone a toaster, right? And we're just not creatures humans are not actually all that good at sort of being creative over long periods of time. So if I ask you for 100 different ways to sell me a toaster, you're going to run out of ideas. The machine won't. And so those use cases where it's not necessarily creativity, but it's inspiration, generative AI works really, really well for those.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And I think like we're already seeing that in early adoption trends for generative AI, and even the workflows platform that we've been using. I think internal tooling, and that's for things that is going to otherwise just require a scale problem, is a really, really, really obvious use case for Gen AI. And I think that there are other elements where bringing data or using data plus examples of previously created work to generate something that new, I find those kinds of patterns tends to do really, really well with as well. And so, there's countless examples of these kinds of problems. I think like one thing that is probably obvious when, based on the first answer that Christian gave, is that the use cases it's probably not going to be best at are, for example, things that are best fit for, predictive systems, right? There is obvious limitations to the type of data. AI or Gen AI works better with unstructured data, but I wouldn't hang my hat on a GPT-4 being better at, I don't know, predicting your customer segment than a model that was trained on your organization's data and, had a lot more context to be able to make that decision. Maybe that'll change, with like GPT-7 or something, but I just, would actually be curious Christian's take on that, but I don't think it's really, I don't think that's a good use case.
Yeah, so Christian, should you be demand forecasting with GPT-4, I guess is another way to ask that question?
Definitely not. No, I mean, it's kind of one of the reasons why it's so hard to reason about these models is if you ask them, I take a different example. If you ask GPT-4 or whatever, like, what stock should I invest in today? It's going to give you an answer, and it's going to be a very realistic answer. So it's going to sound exactly like your actual investment advisor sounds like, but there's nothing behind that. It's just predicting words and stuff. And it might give you, like, the answer might be plausible, but it's missing a deeper layer of logic. And so, using GPT-4 to do demand forecasting, I certainly wouldn't try and do that. Whether GPT-7 could do it or not, that I don't know.
Great, thank you both for sharing some specific ways GenAI can be used and implemented in brand marketing. So I think to close on this final topic, I think our audience will find it valuable to zoom back up to the 30,000-foot view and think a little bit about the broader implications of GenAI for human capital and brand marketing and beyond. So let's just go ahead and address the elephant in the room head on. I think, Shikhar, you started with this, so maybe I'll ask you first, actually. Will generative AI completely replace human jobs in marketing?
Completely replace? Absolutely not. And, hopefully there's a good bow on anyone I scared with the hype factor at the beginning. I think radically transform, strong yes, right? Marketing is a critical function for any company. And I think marketers have the pleasure of working, that I've had the pleasure of working with, are, extremely dynamic, resilient individuals that have brilliant ideas and top-notch execution skills. At the end of the day, those aren't going anywhere. And I think it's even more important for people to develop those skill sets in today's world. I think even when you think about automation in the loop, there's a lot that you should consider about how you're spending your time today and how you hoped to be spending your time when you signed up for your job. And chances are that, those two things aren't exactly the same, which means you could actually spend more time doing what you love, what you thought you'd be doing, and less time doing a lot of the things that, you probably don't actually enjoy about the, typical white collar assembly line that we're all a part of. And when you think about using your finite creative energy, I think, Christian, you put it really, really well a moment ago when you really framed it up as, there's a lot of solutions that aren't obvious or are obvious in hindsight, and GenAI is not going to be in a position to come up with, right? Those are the types of things that you should be spending your time thinking about. Those are the kinds of problems that require, human effectiveness or a human brain, right, in order to be able to conquer, which means that once you come up with those ideas, once you've figured out what the obvious 0 to 1 opportunity is, it's actually using AI in tandem in order to lean in on how we can actually make that a reality and not be blocked by the typical things, right? At most large organizations, something as simple as a budgeting process and a long-winded project review cycle that requires 17 technical architects to sign off might be the reason why you don't even care to start on a project in the first place. And so if a lot of those problems are gone and you're not having to spend, I don't know, half your day thinking about 19 different variations to sell someone a toaster, then how can you use your energy? And what does that actually mean for your business? I think that's the real aha moment, right? And it's not to say that there aren't things that, you probably don't want to spend your time doing anymore, but just that if the market fails to evolve, then we've all done ourselves a disservice and, might as well just pack up and stop even giving a shit about making cool things.
Christian, what's your take on the robots replacing all of us?
For once, I think Shikhar's take is going to be the spicy one. Mine is, look, I think if my bet is, look, 10 years out, if you look at the number of people employed in marketing, it's not going to be any lower than it is today. But I think if you double click on that, the nature of the jobs is going to change quite a lot. So let's analogize to, the world of, I don't know, consulting or something like that. If you look back at the way consulting was done in the 80s, you had teams that did the consulting, right? The sort of the cerebral part. And then you had teams that made PowerPoint slides by hand. And then you had people who did spreadsheets by hand, right? And today, I think consulting is something like 30 times larger than it was in the 80s as an industry. But the jobs that were make the spreadsheet job and make the PowerPoint job, those have disappeared because they've become part of just, the consultant does it themselves, because the ability for one person to be 10 times more productive and to do things with a basic skill set that used to require a very specialized skill set, that's what's changing in this industry. So if I had to bet, I'd say, look, a lot of the more cerebral aspects of marketing and sales are going to be the bits that stay, right? The sort of strategy pieces, the analysis pieces, and then a lot of the more sort of assembly line work is going to vanish. And so I'd say, look, if I was advising someone who's beginning their career today, I'd say, make sure you're one of the cerebral roles that is sort of trying to automate some of the more procedural stuff rather than the other way around. So I think the industry will change quite a lot, but I don't think it's going to shrink.
Shikhar, maybe you could share with us how your perspective on human labor in the future connects to what you all are doing at Copy.ai. How does it inform how you're building the solutions that you're offering to customers?
It's a great question. And I think we've always seen this as being the great equalizer. And I think human potential will be unlocked with access to this technology. And so when you think about a typical generalist skill set, right, that's really what's being rewarded by this technology. And it actually encourages us to be more well-rounded in the first place. And I think that when you zoom out and think about what that means from like a product development perspective, it means that, when we think about who the user is that we're building for and why we're building things in the way that we're building it, that it's designed for someone that, that has a good understanding of the problem to be able to actually build a solution. And that's actually what's so revolutionary and transformative about generative AI today, because, for the longest time, even in, as of a few years ago, the only way to get anything significant done that actually, generated repeatable value for a business was basically stapling a project manager to an engineer to a business user that actually knew about the problem in order to, get something done. And, I think that when you think about the drastic change, even something like Google has had in our lives, right? Like when I was a consultant, that was like my most used tool out of all of them, just being able to understand all of the nuances of a customer's business, or, follow up on, understanding, something that came up in a customer interview. Those are the kinds of things that really accelerated my ability to give them, the answers they're looking for, or think about the problem in the way that they were thinking about it, so that I could build ultimately, something that would resolve that problem or, assuage that pain point. And I think that if we design systems and we design technology that makes it easier for people with the problems to actually be able to build something sustainable and scalable, we're doing a great service to the world. And so, actually, shameless plug here, Copy.ai workflows just went live to any user as of this morning. Encourage you to try it out. Hopefully you built some cool stuff. Also, shameless plug to say that, we're not the only company in the world that's designing for typical business users. So think more about how you can actually empower that layer of the organization. And I think the ROI from that investment will be very, very obvious.
Let me actually adjust on the fly here. Maybe let's go to Q&A right now, and then we can close on the note by returning to those overhyped conceptions that we talked about at the beginning of this webinar. But it looks like we have some pretty pertinent questions coming through the Q&A and also to my personal chat as well. So maybe starting with Christian, and to everyone else, we'll spend the next 10 minutes doing Q&A, so please feel free to continue to send questions. So Christian, you mentioned that GenAI has a limitation when it comes to performance marketing. It's not the unlock of performance metrics that maybe some people present it. So could you expand on what are the bottlenecks that you've seen from marketing professionals on generating performance ads?
Yeah, so to be clear on what I meant, so let's look at it this way. There are there is no such thing as the best ad overall, right? And I think this is something which I always found a bit weird about a lot of marketing and sales, where we spend a lot of time trying to A/B test our way to the best ad. Because we're kind of limited in how many options we can test, we kind of try to find the thing that is going to work well on average for most people. Whereas that's kind of objectively a terrible way of thinking about it, because the best way that I would sell Shikhar a shoe is entirely different from the best way for me to sell James a shoe. And imagine, I don't know, one of them's a runner, the other one's, a couch potato. The sales pitch is going to be different. So the idea that there's sort of like this one ad out there that's magically going to be great for everyone is this kind of, it's a wrong idea. The power that generative AI gives you is to create a large number of, very different kind of ads and then test those. And if you're, my perspective again is from Facebook. If you're able to create a large variety of ads and put them into an ad delivery system like Facebook or Google or TikTok or whatever has, those are systems that are designed to take an ad, take a user, and find which user needs to see what ad. And those systems work very, very well. So we really shouldn't ever be in a position where we're trying to say, let me try to figure out what the one best ad is for everyone. Instead, we should be thinking, what are the ways that we can present our product in different ways? What are the 10 canonical ways I can pitch a running shoe to someone? And then create, good, visually pleasing, best practice ads for those 10 things, and then let these delivery systems figure out who really is the runner, who is the couch potato, who is, all these other things. That's the way that at the end of the day, you look and you should see a lift on your performance marketing, but you haven't done that by trying to find like the best ad, right? You've done it through variety and leveraging the fact that we have ways of matching the best ad to the best person. And it's really about that.
Yeah, this is kind of related to another question that came through. Let me phrase it in a way that connects. So you're talking about tailoring the ads to the right people. That's how you drive performance, right? So how should we think about generative AI and the vast amount of customer data that we as enterprises or agencies have? Like, how do we connect those and personalize?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my hot take, because I don't think I have an opinion. I'm not sure I have a definitive answer for you. But this is, again, something that we thought about a lot at Facebook, including like Zuckerberg himself. There's a group of people who believes that the future is about, the what is it called? The segment of one, where there's like an ad for every single person, because I know a lot, I have a lot of information about James, I have a lot of information about Shikhar, and like there's a perfect ad for each one of those people. My belief is that the best way to sell something to you has very little to do with you. It has everything to do with the product, because there's probably only 10 ways to sell a toaster, right? Maybe 12. And so the fact that, I don't know, I know that James, I'm inventing here, but let's imagine James is really into figure skating. That does not help you sell James a toaster. And so the way I think about personalization is actually the other way around. It's let me start from the product. Figure out what are all the different ways I can talk about this product. I can position the product. I can promote the product. What are those different messages, right? And then create different versions of those ads. And then the problem is, again, coming from the world of delivery systems like Facebook and Google, how do you find what the right person to see each version of the ad is? So when you're the consumer, you say, hey, this ad is weirdly personalized. But it's actually an illusion of personalization, because there's not a billion different versions of the toaster ad. There's like 10, and a delivery system has chosen to give you that one. So my view, to summarize, is that actually, for the most part, a lot of what we know about our consumers is largely irrelevant to how you would sell them a toaster or a sneaker. Focus on the aspects that are going to help you determine which version of an ad is going to be the best version for them. But ultimately, that problem is bounded by the way to sell a toaster, not all the millions of different things that you know about the user.
I think the exact opposite is actually true when you think about B2B sales as an example, because it's not about selling them the toaster. Christian, you're probably right. There aren't a billion ways to sell every single company's product in the world. But if you think about like an APM campaign or some way of getting the right person in an org's attention, the way that you understand their problems is directly related to the way that you actually want to message to them. And perhaps even like the kind of icebreaker that you would use to get their attention in like a cold email that they might be getting millions of today. And so that was where I think it's very, very valuable to use that data in order to be able to personalize further. And then there's also other instances in which generative AI, not from like an ad perspective, but could be really valuable at helping to boost conversion of existing campaigns that you're performing today. Take like an abandoned cart sequence, right? We all get them. Oh, last chance to get one more, 10% more off or whatever they are. If you have previous purchase history and say it's like a shopping store or like a clothing store, and we know that Christian has previously bought, I don't know, like Air Force Ones from the store before, and he was, potentially looking at buying like, some other Nike branded hats and other fits. Being able to show someone a generated image with the exact shoes that that Christian's already bought with the other accessories that had, and reminding them of the value of the overall outfit, could actually boost the conversion of a campaign like that, and is actually incredibly personalized based on the data that you have. And so I think there is value to having a one-to-one conversation with your customer. And I think every marketer would feel like that is, a step in the right direction for the kind of brand that we probably all want to build. But whether or not, that is ad copy is like the right use case for personalized, I think is the real question, right? It might be for certain services, but there's probably much more valuable ways that you can use it to drive conversion.
Well, we have a question here more about the tools. So what do you guys think about the different tools out there for text generation, for image generation, starting to see a lot more in video generation? Outside of ChatGPT and Midjourney, are there things that are top of mind that brand marketers and other marketing professionals should be using on a day-to-day basis?
I'm not going to mention Copy.ai because that's definitely what I use on a day-to-day basis. So let's talk about some other content types here. As far as video generation goes, everyone should be checking out HeyGen if you haven't already. Joshua, the founder there, is doing some incredible work, and those are probably the most lifelike AI avatars that I've seen, and is relatively easy to get set up. In addition to that, Tome, if you haven't already used Tome for slide generation, I haven't used them in a while. I remember when they first launched their beta product, but really, interesting. I would probably not use one of the decks they generated out of the box, but as someone that used to make a lot of decks, I like the framing that it puts around it. It can be really good for getting slide ideas and stuff. Few others. Cloudinary actually just launched some new AI capabilities as a part of their API. So if you're already, or your customer is already a Cloudinary customer, highly recommend checking out what they've got up their sleeve. But I think like image transposition and most of the stuff they're already good at, but with generative AI sprinkled in.
Those are good. Those are good ones. I think I would add. So I think HeyGen does avatars. There's another company, Runway ML. They're sort of the leaders in video synthesis that sort of like describe I don't know, someone jumping off a mountain with a parachute and then generate a video there. Video generation from scratch is still a little bit janky, but again, when you think about what is hard to when you're trying to mock up a video ad, it's usually not the finished product. If you know exactly what you need to do and everybody's signed off on it, actually just producing it is pretty easy. It's all the prototyping stage that's hard. So even though video generation is kind of janky at the moment, tools like Runway ML help you do that in a very, very quick way. You can mock up what it is you want to do, take that to your leadership, get approval. I think that's a really interesting proposition in a world where a lot of marketing is sort of shifting towards video first surfaces. I had another one, but it escapes me at the moment.
Yeah, throw it in the chat if it comes to you. But I think we have time for one last question, which from the perspective of a brand agency, how can agencies ensure that the creative output of GenAI aligns with the client's brand image and voice?
So I said I wouldn't plug Copy.ai anymore, but we've actually got a really awesome capability here. It's called Brand Voice. Surprise, right? Actually does what it is described it to do. But look, you can use prompt chaining in addition to private models that are designed to identify tone and apply tone in order to get this much, much, much better. And I know there's some early MVPs from other companies that I've seen that didn't quite work as well as I want them to do. I think the key that we've uncovered is, again, if we can actually get better prompt guidance or get better, tone guidance from existing content, we can actually generate content that sounds much more like that tone. So the way it works with Copy.ai is you literally copy and paste content. We deconstruct that into, again, English text. You can edit that text if it doesn't fit exactly or if it was overfit to the examples that you provided. Then you can use it, as much as you want in order to transform any output that's generated with our app. I haven't seen any other really features that I think do that better than others. I'd be curious to know, Christian, if you know, for example, if there's a way to do that with AI-generated video as an example.
Not yet. I think the short answer is not yet, but it's not. It's something that I've seen brands do in the image space by fine-tuning image generation models on existing ads, which is a little bit more involved in image than it is in text. But yeah, Shikhar's answer is a good one.
Cool. Well, with the last 2 minutes, let's wrap up by returning to those initial generative AI misconceptions or exaggerations that you guys led off the webinar with. So Christian, yours was around performance marketing. I think we touched on that with the Q&A a little bit, but what do you hope your audience comes away with having learned about performance marketing and generative AI?
I hope that we see it as a way to change the problem that we're trying to solve, right? It's not about finding, it's about using generative AI for what it's really good at, and that is creating a lot of different things very, very cheaply, very, very quickly. That's the core advantage of this technology. How do we make that work for us in our industry?
Cool. And Shikhar, yours was about, is it AI taking over your job? Someone with AI taking over your job? What do you hope our audience learns on that perspective?
Stop thinking about it as someone taking over aspects of your job that you probably don't enjoy today, and start thinking about it as, what does the world actually look like in a world where we actually create something net new and use this technology for some of the use cases that we've even discussed today, right? How do we actually leverage it in a way to create excess value, as opposed to just thinking about it as a silver bullet to actually drive operational efficiency?
Great. Well, my panelists today were Christian Kaas and Shikhar Singh. Thank you guys so much for sharing your perspectives. All attendees and actually all registrants, but non-attending registrants can't hear me right now. So I don't know why I'm saying this, but everybody will get a recording of this video as well as an AI-powered summary of the call. So thank you all for joining. We'll see you again soon, I hope.
Fantastic. And apologies again to Comcast.
Yeah.
Have a great day.
Good. Thanks, James.
Yep.
Later.